almost everybody but the...
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this. If I can ask the room to come to order, please. Good afternoon, and welcome to this hearing of the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, March 3rd, 2014. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the Committee, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Bob Blumenfield, Mitchell Englander, Paul Kretz, and Mike Bonin, and we're ready to begin. We'll be taking general public comment on matters unrelated to agenda items at the outset of the meeting. And so far I've received no general public comment cards, so general public comment is now closed. We'll be taking the closed session items at the end because we have a lot of people here waiting on the agenda items. So without objection, members will defer items 1, 2, and 3 for the time being. I'd like to propose items 5 and 6 for approval on consent. And Mr. Blumenfield, item 6 is your motion, which I seconded, but I'd like to propose it as a consent item unless anyone objects to that. If you'd like to speak to it. Okay. All right, then we'll hold that one off for the moment. Yeah, okay. So item 5 then, proposed as a consent item to approve without objection. That'll be the action of the committee. That brings us then to item number 4, the CAO report on the FSR. Mr. Seha.
Item number 4 is the City Administrative Officer report relative to the mid-year third financial status report for fiscal year 2013-14.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm Maria Gutierrez with the CAO's office. Before you is the mid-year financial status report. Regarding revenue, on aggregate, general fund revenues are currently approximately $30 million ahead of plan. Current trends illustrate that there are still significant risks to revenue, consisting of lower related cost reimbursements and a shortfall in utility users' tax receipts. Specifically, this is attributed to lower electrical users' tax revenue arising from issues with the Dwp billing system. Most economically sensitive revenues continue to recover. However, the rate of growth may be tempered should national reports concerning weak holiday sales, home sales, and hiring extend to the local economy. Regarding expenditures, in the second FSR, this office identified a shortfall of approximately $23.98 million. This was mainly attributed to shortfalls in the Fire Department, City Attorney, GSD, Transportation, and the previously anticipated election costs for the Public Health Initiative. After council action, that shortfall was reduced to approximately $21 million. Since that time, the Health Department initiative has been declared invalid by the court, and the Fire Department deficit has continued to decline. However, based on expenditures through the end of December, this office is now projecting a year-end expenditure deficit of approximately $36.6 million. This deficit is mainly due to the need to cash finance the LAPD Digital In-Car Video Phase 2 project at $4.39 million. The reimbursement of building permit fees related to the JW Marriott LA Live Hotel of $3.9 million, consistent with the development agreement previously approved by Council. There are also newly reported expenditure shortfalls for outside counsel of about $2.5 million and a projected shortfall of $10 million related to the liability claims account. However, the latter shortfall of $10 million will depend on what cases are settled at year-end. Should the council and the mayor pursue the goal of reaching 10,000 police officers by year-end, the projected year-end expenditure deficit of $36.6 million could increase by approximately $3.2 million. Additional detail on the year-end deficits are summarized in Table 1 of our report. Given the city's $242 million deficit projected for next fiscal year, the recommendations in this report are provided with zero impact to the reserve fund. The mid-year recommendations reduced the projected shortfall from $36.6 million to $21 million, with funds remaining in the UB reserve for economic uncertainties to fully offset the remaining $21 million should certain deficits materialize at year-end. Specifically, our budget balancing solutions are as follows. We are recommending the transfer of $8.8 million from the UB reserve for economic uncertainties to offset certain deficits. We also include a recommendation to discontinue the fire department's ambulance augmentation plan for 3 months to generate $2.5 million in savings through year-end. We recommend the transfer of the UB police sworn hiring funds of $3.22 million to partially offset the cost of digital in-car video Phase 2. And upon receipt of a $1 million loan repayment from the city attorney from the Consumer Protection Trust Fund, we recommend that those funds be used to partially offset the $2.5 million deficit in the outside counsel shortfall. In this report, we identify the reserve fund balance at approximately $339.1 million. This is an increase from the second FSR. This takes us to 6.97% of the adopted general fund budget. In the second FSR, we were at 6.77%. This office will evaluate the city's current reserve fund policy and the potential for increasing the reserve fund policy goal from 5% to 10% of the city's general fund revenues. This would also be inclusive of the Budget Stabilization Fund. In this report, we also highlight certain issues of concern.
I'm sorry, I want to interrupt you just for a moment there. The new proposed goal would be inclusive of the Budget Stabilization Fund, but the
Correct.
numbers that you gave just now are exclusive of the Budget Stabilization
That is correct.
Fund. So to be clear, we have a $330 million or so reserve.
Reserve fund.
And in addition to that, the $60 million or so in the Budget Stabilization Fund, bringing the total to around $400 million if you combine the two. Currently.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So in the report, we highlight certain issues of concern, such as there are issues with the solid waste fee billing and sewer service charge revenues. And these are tied to the implementation of the Department of Water and Power billing system. We report that the collection rate for the solid waste fee has declined from 98.3% to 85.8% for the same period. And the sewer service charge revenues are lower than projected. We also provide a discussion regarding labor-related litigation. As you may know, and there's a separate matter in your committee today, but there was a global agreement that was reached with the LA City Attorneys Association. There are some fiscal impacts associated with that deal. We identify that in our report. We're happy to report that we anticipate that the city attorney's office will be able to absorb some of the costs that will impact their budget through some salary savings. Should they not be able to offset the full amount, we'll be reporting that in the year end. There are also costs to the liability claims account. We do not anticipate that changes our $10 million projection at this time. We anticipate also savings on the pension side. We believe that will be absorbed through the LACER's true-up process that's taking place this fiscal year. Other recommendations that are included in our report is a request by this office to expend up to $25,000 from the Capital Administration Fund for the retention of a consultant to perform research relating to the use of public-private partnerships for streetcars. There's also a request from the City Clerk's Office to expend savings from the CD6 special election to process an anticipated ordinance petition for a health commission anticipated in March 2014. there is a discussion also related to community-based development organizations and community development block grant funds. At this time, pending further discussion on the issue, we would recommend that those recommendations 20 and 21, be held in Budget and Finance to allow more time to review. I understand that there is also a proposed amendment requested by Street Services.
Yes, this office received a request from the Bureau of Street Services with regard to transferring funds from Measure R local return to various accounts within the Bureau of Street Services for what is entitled the Broadway Dress Rehearsal Project. And I believe there are representatives here that could speak more clearly on what that project is.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that. Sure, we'll come back to that. After you've completed is that the conclusion of your report?
That concludes our report.
All right, thank you. Members, so the way we'll proceed with this is if you have general questions regarding the FSR for Ms. Gutierrez, this would be the appropriate time. And then when we conclude those, we'll go through the FSR by department, as we typically do, so that if you have questions of particular departments, we'll get that list together, and then we can allow everyone who's not on that list to go ahead and vacate their seats so that the standing room only folks can sit down and everybody can get back to work. So general questions for Ms. Gutierrez first. Anything on that, Mr. Koretz?
So how are we going to monitor the risks to revenue for the remainder of the year?
Well, I understand one of the biggest issues is the Dwp Billing Issue. There is a working group that has been developed at the request of the Energy Committee. It involves the CAO, the Office of OPA, the CLA, the departments themselves. Our Inspector General has also been working on that issue. There is a report relative to fiscal impact that will be released by our office on that issue. I understand the Inspector General is working on that. Based on the Core Commission's recommendations, this office has taken a greater role in tracking departmental receipts and bringing those issues up in our financial status reports, working with departments, being more proactive, identifying these issues early on. So those are some of the ways we're working on that.
And are we going to monitor LAPD hiring issues as well and overtime issues?
Well, certainly that is one of the issues that we report on in our financial status report. I don't know if our budget analyst has anything else to add on that issue.
Is that person here?
Well, it would certainly be appropriate to address questions to the police department if you wish when we come to that.
Okay, we'll do it then.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as a general matter, I think it's safe to say that probably in every FSR that comes before us, we're going to be addressing that issue.
Okay. Very good.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Just a quick one. Look, I sort of guessed the answer to this, but what's of the 36.6 million? How much of that is ongoing versus structural?
The $12 million that we've identified for fire department, that is an unfunded ongoing expense. The police department's digital in-car video, I understand there's a third phase to that project. So while the project as a whole is one time, the cost will extend to an additional fiscal year. The issue with the General Services Department, it's based on maintenance and equipment being used for a longer period of time, so that potentially is ongoing.
Ongoing unless we solve it with purchasing new equipment, in which case it could theoretically be a one-time.
Potentially. The issue with the Emergency Management Department, the ADA compliance, I understand that's a one-time cost of $490,000. It's tied to a contract. City Clerk, the expenses for the LA Unified Board member election, that's a one-time, but it's also reimbursed. The issue of the Clean and Green funding request from Board of Public Works. That's a one-time. And the Animal Services upgrade for computer upgrades, that was a citywide issue that some departments were able to absorb, some were not. That's tied to the lifespan of technology, so it could be, it's a one-time at this time.
About a third.
And the JW Marriott Hotel agreement, that's a one-time. Outside counsel is really tied to the number of cases. The outside counsel, is driven by the number of cases that are the city has a conflict, required or insufficient staffing. So, that estimate varies from year to year. The same with liability claims. It depends on what cases are settled this year. So, it's a mixture.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Bonner? Mr. Englander?
Just for departments.
Okay, thank you. I do, just so that we don't escape mentioning it, I do just want to highlight the status of the reserve fund, which I think is some of the best news that we see in this FSR, when we're now, even without the budget stabilization fund, bumping right up at 7%. Do you know when the last time the city of Los Angeles had a 7% reserve fund set aside? I don't think anyone in this room was alive when that last happened. And so given the fact that we've reached that level in the context of fixing the budget challenges that have come from the greatest recession in the last 80 years is an extraordinary achievement, I think, and it's contributing to not only to our future stability in being able to deal with the ups and downs of the economy, but it's also contributing to our current budget health because of the stability of our credit rating as well. So it really is a remarkable achievement that I think I never want to let pass the opportunity to mention what a great job this committee and the council and the CAO's office, CLA's office have done to get us to that point. So with that, thank you. Don't go anyplace just yet, but I want to move now to specific departmental requests for information or questions that members may have. And Mr. Englander, can we start with you?
Sure. EMD and fire. Just those.
Okay. Anybody else ready?
LAPD.
Okay, police. Mr. Blumenfield?
That's sanitation.
Sanitation.
Housing.
Housing?
You pulled 20 and 21 already, correct?
Well, that's going to be my recommendation.
Yeah.
And,
I'm going to add zoo. Anything else? Mr. Englander, you're good?
You're good.
Mr. Blumenfield?
Yep.
Good. Mr. Kratz, anything else?
Nope.
Mr. Bonnet? Wow, this may be a new record for us.
Building safety?
We did not say building and safety. Would you like to add them?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay, so my list, and be prepared to add anything that I've missed, is EMD, fire, police, sanitation, housing, zoo, and building and safety. Anything else? All right, if you are not among those that I mentioned, thank you very much for coming down, and see you next time. Wow. We usually get a larger exodus than that. Okay, while they're exiting, why don't we go ahead and take the public comment on this report, if we can. Dr. Rhodes, you want to come up and provide your comment now?
Hello.
Hello.
First I wanted to say my very favorite page of the FSR is Amendment 13, page 1, which is the Inspector General's report, and he reports that he found $45 million in grant money that's uncollected. I think that should be a headline. $45 million. New money. Excellent. And on the search for new revenues, wanted to say we're looking forward to the CAO CLA report on managed hiring that I know this committee has asked for. We see, especially when there's combing of city funds and we find revenue, that there is an urgency, we feel, to restoring revenue-generating positions. For example, the positions that Building and Safety was allocated, the 6 positions for the blight inspectors, to our knowledge, they're still not hired and they're parked in the managed hiring process. That means we're not collecting revenue. That's bad. On the LAPD number, I wanted to share on the issue of civilianization. I heard over the weekend with Cheryl Parisi that the administrative civilian staff are so short from cuts and attrition that they are 6 months behind entering criminal data profile material, which is kind of scary. So takes me back to why we're looking forward for the managed hiring report. We've got to figure out how to get staffing for essential services. And then just lastly, on the reserve policy, it's very exciting. You're at 8.2%. We do hope that that policy wouldn't be moved before you looked at the managed hiring issue. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I saw Jessica here a moment ago. Sorry? Oh, she is. Okay. Jessica McLean for CD14. You're the only other card, so if you'd like to be heard.
Thank you. Sorry.
No problem.
Actually, I think that there's a card from DOT. Oh, okay. Well, we would like to request a slight amendment to the FSR. Excuse me. The Broadway Streetscape Dress Rehearsal, which is underway, it's already under construction and already funded by council, has a section of street paving about 400 feet that needs to be redone by Bureau of Street Services. The funding is there. It can be handled through an interdepartmental transfer, but BSS doesn't have the appropriation authorization to spend it. So we need that technical change applied to the FSR so that they can spend the money when it gets to them. It doesn't change the amount for the project, which is already allocated, just moves it from one place to the other and tells the other that they can spend it, is generally the the gist of it. It's from some Measure R accounts within DOT to the Street Services account, fund number 100. I can give you guys the technical if you don't have it. And Lon Nguyen, who's the construction manager from DOT, is here to provide their input on that request.
All right, so members, that amendment I think should be before you. And if you have any questions about it, we do have a representative from DOT if you'd like to inquire. Mr. Bloomfield?
For the DOT representative.
That's, if you come on up.
Just specifically, what would the funds have been used for if we weren't moving them over?
Actually, I just spoke to my accountant about an hour ago, and there was cost savings. We bid out the biggest financial obligation of the package, which is landscaping, And so we have about $350,000 unallocated at this time, including this almost $500,000. So I'd like to move the unallocated portion totaling $122,400 to the Bureau of Street Services so we can basically have a win-win situation. We're implementing this project, and some of the curb line and the pavement conditions south of Broadway, on Broadway south of Olympic, there's a lot of bus activity there. It was resurfaced, I think, way back in 2007. So the undulating pavement there wouldn't be the best condition to put a surface for pedestrians to walk, which is what this project is. So I highly recommend that we utilize the funds that are available and not allocated to anything else to just level the surface.
But there are cost savings from what? From this project or from all projects?
No, from this project, there was an allocation of $1.5 million for this project, and the unallocated, uncommitted portion, where we would be finished without, this is just our contingency. So we would still have a very healthy contingency with this expenditure.
But it's still staying within the same project is what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Anything further on this? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. So why don't we start, Mr. Englander had EMD stepped out for just a moment, so we'll come back to that. Why don't we start with police?
Sure he wants to be there for that.
Oh, yeah, you know what, you're right. Sorry, hold off on that one. Why don't we start with, let's start with building and safety. Building and safety, come on up.
Jason Clean, Office of the CAO.
Mr. Blumenfield.
So in the report it says the department's backlog revenue generating workload shortfall is due to continuing increase in demand for new construction services. So basically, as I understand it, there's all these new projects that are chomping at the bit to be done, but we're not able to service those projects. Is that right?
Correct.
What can we do? Because that's the opposite situation that we as a city policy want to be moving toward. We want to, if their revenue, these are projects that pay for themselves, right? These are not city funds. These are projects that the cost of it will pay for it. So what are we doing to address this situation? Because it's not, and what's leading us into this situation? Because I don't think any of us want to be in that situation.
When the market turned at the end of 2007, unfortunately, building and safety wasn't in a situation where the enterprise fund could pay for all the positions that they had. And unfortunately, there were layoffs in the department. So the department staff was reduced by about 20%. And we're just now actually getting them back up to where they were pre-recession. So projects are coming in. They're starting to come in at a greater rate. The building code just got updated as of January 1st, so the department saw a big uptick in the number of projects that came in prior to the updating of the building code. So workload went up by about 10% in December. The department, working through the managed hiring committee, does have a blanket unfreeze for all revenue generating positions. So as vacancies occur, the department has the authority to basically backfill those positions as soon as possible. We're working with the department to make sure that they have overtime resources to meet peak workload demands. We know that the uptick in projects coming through in December was a result of the new building code coming into place, so that should stabilize over the next few months. We're also working with them to add new positions in next year's budget, so hopefully they'll have an opportunity to add some additional positions. We're working with them on bringing forward as needed positions as well as 120-day retirees to come back to help with that workload, and we're looking to see what opportunities we have to contract out for peak workload demands.
So there are no, I guess what I'm looking for is what are the choke points, and are there any choke points that we can help eliminate? Because we all want to see these projects get approved quickly.
The choke points right now is just related to staffing and not having enough bodies to do the work. So we're trying to make sure that we look at what the sweet spot is in terms of staffing and looking at opportunities to make sure that we have other options in place to meet some of those peak workload demands. And we're working with the department, and that'll be in Plum Committee tomorrow.
Okay, but it's not the managed hiring process because you've been freed from that. and it's not the testing, the personnel issues, there are no other departments that are hindering it.
No.
So you're just in the process of developing a hiring plan to be able to meet that need?
Correct.
Okay. It's a good problem to have, I suppose, because it's an indicator of the strength of the economy, that there's greater demand for those services. And these are important positions because, as Mr. Blumenfield points out, they are in furtherance of economic development, so should be revenue generating. And on that point, Dr. Rhodes mentioned the 6 positions for blight inspectors. I know many of us have been concerned about the fact that this council did pass an ordinance providing for fines directed at financial institutions for blighted foreclosed properties, for example. Can you give a kind of a status update on where we are with that?
The 6 positions that we're adding in the budget were based on about 5,000 foreclosed properties a year. Unfortunately, there was litigation in Chicago by Sallie Mae and Freddie Mac as it resulted to the federal properties, and that made up about a half of the properties that building and safety would be doing enforcement on. Unfortunately, the federal program does allow for their own monitoring of those foreclosed properties, so we're kind of in the process right now of reanalyzing how many properties would fall within the bucket and what the staffing resources would be like, because the original fee amounts that were proposed in the adopted budget are insufficient to support the staff that would be required to maintain the other properties in the queue.
Thank you. Anything else for building and safety members? Mr. Kretz, Mr. Bonner? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. So let's go now back to, why don't we go next to fire? Fire department ready?
Fire department.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
All right. Start with Mr. Englander.
Right, thank you. Just a question on the augmented ambulance plan. If we discontinued that per the CAO's recommendation, what effect would that have on the department directly? And if you can walk us through the history just a little bit on that, I think that's worthy of discussion.
I will, Councilman. Mario Royd, I'm the Chief Deputy of Emergency Operations for the Fire Department. Back in May of 2013, I think it was May 5th, 2013, the then Fire Chief Brian Cummings initiated a ambulance augmentation program where he took staff from fire resources, reconfigured into 11 ambulances. They immediately had an impact on workload for the districts that were immediately covered by these ambulances. Since then, 2 of those ambulances have been converted to paramedic ambulances and placed into our highest workload areas. The balance, the 9 ambulances that are in the field today, continue to run calls. They're an integral part of our program. The removal of those ambulances would have a significant impact on our workload, and the workload of those specific basic life support ambulances actually keeps paramedic ambulances and fire trucks available for more critical calls. So in those areas, they are having a significant impact. To remove them, I think would have significant impacts on our ability to deliver services in those areas.
And this is the case where we, I believe at the last minute last time, we ended up putting it back and funding it on an emergency basis. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I believe the council took an action to place the staffing back on fire resources where the staffing for the ambulance augmentation program was removed.
Well, my concern without creating some of the other efficiencies that we're trying to create or looking at a lot of the recommendations, either the various recommendations coming out of the PA Consulting Report, which just came out this morning, by the way, and or some of the issues and ideas that are coming out of the mayor's office as well, coupled with FireStat, and that's underway.
without looking at the ability to redirect the department in terms of management structures or how that's going to play out in the next several months and several years, I would suggest at this point we keep this money in there and not go with the CAO's recommendation, just based on the drill tower, the fact that we can't hire as many as quickly. We have 2 classes started and 2 on the backs, but we'll have less firefighters net at the end of those hires than we have now because of the rate of attrition. Is that correct?
I don't know the exact numbers, but that's what I'm told, yes.
Thank you. And it is going to be my recommendation as well that we hold that recommendation in committee, particularly given the PA consulting review that will be coming up by through committee and the council.
If I'm hoping we can perhaps even schedule a joint committee for that, public safety and budget.
I think that would be a helpful step. Thank you. But given the uncertainty over how we're going to be able to achieve efficiencies in the department or enhancements of the department's revenues in this budget, enhancement of its budget in its entirety. Given those uncertainties, I think this is the wrong time to take ambulances off the street. So I agree with you, Mr. Ingleworth. Other questions for fire?
I won't ask any questions because you guys covered it. It was my recommendation to go in the same direction. The cuts that we've had in some of the mountain and canyon areas, including in my district a couple of years ago, I think were bad and harsh, and this is a partial and incomplete correction to have the ambulances there, and the idea of taking them away freaks me out, so I'm glad to see the will of the committee seems to be leave them there for the time being.
Mr. Kretz?
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think while it is a partial step towards getting where we are, it's a very critical step, and I have no doubt that we've saved some lives as a result. So I'd hate to backtrack on that. So I appreciate this committee moving in that direction.
Okay. Just for the sake of the historical background, I guess, this redeployment happened back in May by a diminution of fire resources in order to staff the ambulance resources, which, as we've just heard, clearly needed. In fact, we probably need even more beyond what we have. So the council action, and I appreciate, Chief, that you clarified this point, the council action was to ensure that we maintained the fire resources at the same time that we didn't retract the chief's decision on the ambulances. The problem is, of course, that our ability to fund that only extended through the end of the fiscal year and not into the existing fiscal year. So that's a large part of the reason that the department is still continuing to incur a deficit. But I do have to congratulate the department that deficit number is coming down. And I think with the benefit of some of the information that we're going to have before us with the consulting report and continuing dialogue with UFLAC and through a variety of other means, I'm hoping that we're going to still be able to chip away further at that. But on that point, it's a painful subject to bring up, but AB 678 is something we've been talking about for about 2 years now. And every time we talk about it, it's been the reimbursement is right around the corner. So where do we stand with our friends in Sacramento now in funding our reimbursements under AB 678?
I do have a little bit of good news, which
Okay.
I think is probably different than what I've been reporting in the past. The process has been confusing at best, and it's been kind of a moving target. And more recently, the state provided clarification with respect to our ability to capture supervisory overhead. And we were told that we are able to include in our calculation reimbursement for supervisory overhead for EMS personnel. So as a result of that modification, we are going to be getting an increase of $6 million in reimbursement. So rather than $18 million, the cost report that we had transmitted to the state as of Friday is for reimbursement of $24 million. So if the state is true to what they had previously reported, that the reimbursement would be received within 60 days of our submission of the cost report, then we should be receiving reimbursement by the end of April.
Okay. So it's good news that the formula has led to an adjustment up, but
It's still short of the $33 million.
number one, but more importantly, we've heard for a long time that the reimbursement is coming, and I'm at a point where I think we have to, if we don't have that money in hand, we have to change our budget assumptions about it for the coming fiscal year, because if we're not going to get reimbursed, we should just, or if it's going to be reimbursed in years from now, then we need to acknowledge that. And it's really become frustrating that this is continuing to hang out there. It's of no fault of anybody in Los Angeles. This is purely a Sacramento issue, I know. But I think we have to, at some point soon, we're going to get to the point where we have to cut our losses, if you will, and start making a more conservative budget assumption that maybe we aren't going to get reimbursed right away on it. But I just wanted to highlight that issue. I hope it happens in 60 days, then it won't be an issue. We'll be done with it. And I'm pleased to hear that there's more money than we thought. So that's good. And then no point in raising the dispatch center issue again, because Mr. Englander has frequently raises that in his committee, and is on top of that. Everybody knows the issue there that's costing us $325,000 a month.
That's one of the recommendations coming out of the report as well, is looking at the dispatch operations and the dual dispatch centers between fire and police.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of discussions we'll have.
Great. Anything else on fire? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go next to EMD. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Mr. Englander.
Yes, thank you very much. It says here it was $500,000 in the unappropriated balance for EMD's disaster planning study. Originally, when we talked about that, it looks like it's an additional $490,000 for a total cost of the report of $990,000 for the report. We've been having this discussion now, I think it's going almost 2 years. It's never come up that it was more than $500,000. That's always been what's budgeted. It was grant funded at first, and then it was funded out and put into the unappropriated balance so the plan can come back and exactly what we're doing. I don't know that we've seen the actual plan yet. I know we've got to do this to meet our ADA compliance and negotiated related ADA issues as part of this operations plan for disaster planning on this study, but it's double from what the discussions have always been, and I'm trying to figure out why or how.
First, I agree with EMD. The increase in cost is to update and revise the city's emergency management plans and annexes, and I guess initially they didn't budget for this much, correct? It's just taken.
And that was my point. I mean, the original discussion, and that's why it was put originally into the UB, because it was always approximated at about $500,000, but there was never exactly the detailed plan to come up with where's the money actually going to go and what is the detailed plan on expenditures for meeting the compliance issues. So now it's coming back at double without still not having the plan. I don't have it.
I think at the time that they put the original $500,000 in the UB, it was just a placeholder estimate.
So it's
Mara Corrala with Office of the CAO. Originally, the original contract amount was $500,000, and that was in 12-13. And then in the 13-14 budget, you're correct that we budgeted an additional $500,000 in the UB for costs that they knew were coming, but we did not have a concrete, estimate of what the future costs of the contract were going to be. And so in September 2013, they executed the second amendment to the contract, and that second amendment of the contract was for a total of $990,000. So at that time, we had the $500,000 in the UB, which is what was transferred to EMD in the first or second FSR. So EMD was still trying to work with our office to identify additional funding for the remaining costs of the second amendment, but
But
At
we were
this
never
time-
told there was going to be a second amendment for double the price. So it sounds sort of like, I'm sorry, I can't even think of another better terminology, but a bait and switch. So the plan originally was 500, and we put it in the UB because there wasn't a real plan put together to get it. Then you came back in the last FSR, if I recall, and said, we've got a plan, it's going to be 500, we've got it all mapped out and the contracts are done. We need to transfer that money now to the UB so we can be in compliance. We agreed, said we needed to do it, it's the right thing to do. We transferred it out, now you're back for another 500 because there's a phase 2, which this is all new to me, that's all. I didn't ever hear that. And I don't know what plan B is or the second part of the contract, what we didn't capture in the first part of the contract, why it wasn't originally planned.
EMD can report back on what the additional scope of services was included in the Second Amendment that was not included in the original contract. They will report back on that information.
Yeah, I don't know quite what to say either, because I distinctly recall, as you do, that it was, this was the amount that we were going to spend. There's been a change, but no one here seems to be real clear on what the change was. So I think that should certainly be reported back to public safety and budget and finance.
I'm comfortable with it just coming back to this committee.
Okay.
I don't mind, as long as I'm on both as well. So I'm happy to do that and perhaps it's just a matter of holding this up and reporting it back. However you'd like to handle this, Chair, I'm okay.
Are you okay with leaving the recommendation for now with the report back?
Sure.
Or you want to hold the recommendation?
Is it time sensitive?
No. I mean,
Okay. Yeah. They can wait to do the transfer.
Okay. So you think if you were to come back maybe in 30 days, you could provide
Yes.
that report? Well, why don't we go ahead and do that? Terrific. Thank you. So we'll hold that recommendation until we get a report back on the substance of it. Anything else on EMD, members? All right. Thank you very much. That brings us to LAPD. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Why don't we start with Mr. Kretz?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How is LAPD doing in terms of keeping within its budget, both now where we are now and where we expect to be at the end of the year?
I mean, the department we're going to end the year within budget. Is Anne Marie Sauer with the CAO, sorry. So yes, it's projected that LAPD will end the year within budget. It's going to be really tight, but especially given the transfer from the UB, but that's what we're projecting.
And I know the number of sworn officers has dipped a bit as we're trying to find ways to beef up those numbers. Has that helped in the budget process?
I'm not sure. Laura Luna, LAPD. I'm not sure I understand your question. First, we're doing everything we can to get to the 10,000 by the end of the fiscal year. So we're continuing to work very, very hard with Personnel Department on achieving that goal.
I'm just wondering whether the fact that we've dipped a little bit below where we had hoped actually has helped us achieve the budget goals that we're seeking to achieve for the year.
Yeah, it's generated a little bit of savings. It's helped with some other accounts. Yes.
And what about civilianization? I know there was a mention, for instance, that we're 6 months behind on our data profiling. Is that correct?
I'm not sure where that project is right now. It's a huge undertaking to come up with the numbers of officers, for example, that are in what would be considered typical civilian positions. So we can get back to you on where we are on that project. But like I mentioned, it's a huge undertaking to update the numbers that we have from a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I probably don't need to remind my colleagues of where I am on this, but my position generally is that a lot of why LAPD is so successful is not that we're policing larger, but that we're policing smarter. So if there are things that we can know that will assist us dramatically that is done by civilians, and we haven't hired enough civilians, so we have a large backlog in that area, I'm not convinced that doing all the technical things that we can do to have more information to help us isn't worth more than a handful of officers to meet a magic number that isn't particularly magical. So I don't know if the department is looking at that or if they're still just hooked on the magic number. Do you know whether the department is open to focusing more on the civilianization and fulfilling some of those functions?
I think the department wants to be focused on both. It's important, it's a belief of the department that we're under-policed and that we need more police officers. And we also know that we've lost so many civilians that we need to be able to hire civilians to do a lot of the essential jobs within the department that are clearly civilian position, duties.
Well, the department did propose laying off 159 more of them, and we sort of had to save the department from itself in that regard. So I'm trying to get a handle on the priorities. Will the department ever focus enough on its civilian needs, or will it always just be focused on the magic number as the top priority?
This year's, the department is very focused on the civilian needs. It's gotten below the tipping point in terms of what our needs are for civilians in the department.
Good. Well, I'm glad to hear the department recognizes that.
Oh, yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Anything further for police, Mr. Bonnet?
I wasn't going to ask anything, but Mr. Koretz triggered something. We always focus every year, and I imagine we will again this year, on the number, the size of the department, how many officers are there, have we hit 10,000? The more relevant metric for me has always been how much time are officers out on the beat? Are they out of the office, not doing paperwork, doing civilian duty? Do we have any metric anywhere that can measure that? I mean, it's easy to say we have 10,000 officers on the payroll, but is there any metric that tells us how much time is actually spent doing actual out-of-the-office police work versus in the office?
What the department has is what they call a patrol, or what we call a patrol plan, which identifies what the optimal number of police officers is that we need in order to adequately police the city. And we've provided some of that information to the CAO along with our budget. But yes, we do. Whether there's a specific amount that you can say, well, officers spend 80% of their time pushing a patrol car and 20% doing something else, I'm not sure that we have it down like that, but we do know what we need, and it's guided by response time and other kinds of factors that is used to develop that patrol plan.
Is that retrospective or prospective? Does it show this is what we wanted to do and this is what actually happened?
The patrol plan is used to forecast what we need in the present and into the future. It's a real-time type of a tool.
So if the deployment allocation didn't match that in a given month, we would know?
Yes.
Could we get a report on the deployment plan projections and how they've matched up for the past, I don't know, say 5 years?
I'm not sure how far back they can go, but we can look into that.
It'd be interesting to see how that measured with the metric of getting close to and further away from 10,000 cops.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anything further for LAPD members? Can you just speak briefly to the progress that the department has made in paying down the sworn overtime bank over the last year or longer?
There will be $15 million going out on Wednesday. That's the amount that was allocated for this current fiscal year. So that's happening this week.
So you will have met the budgeted goal
Yes.
by this week?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I guess I don't want to get the cart before the horse for next fiscal year. Maybe we'll just leave that for the time being. But it obviously is an important priority, I think, for the city to continue to bring that liability down. So appreciate that there's progress being made. Thank you very much. Anything else for police? Make sure I don't have anything. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. Let's go next to sanitation. And Mr. Blumenfield, you can lead off with sanitation.
Sure. Thank you very much for coming here. The collection rate for waste fees dropped to 85.8% as compared to the average of 98.3%. And as I understand it, it's part of the billing process with DWP. I'm very worried about the situation in terms not just because we're losing the revenues, but particularly out in the valley and all over the city. If people end up in a couple of months from now, because they haven't been billed for these months, getting a whopper of a bill, we're going to have a riot on our hands, certainly in the valley. So what are we doing proactively to communicate with the folks who are there's an assumption in my question that the reason for the shortfall, and correct me if I'm wrong on the assumption, is because the bills aren't going out because of the whole DWP, because it's attached to the DWP billing. So part A of my question is that assumption true? Is that the reason for the dip? And then part B is, what are we doing about it? How are we communicating with the public? How are we going to avoid that nightmare scenario that I don't want to see in my district when people get a huge bill at the end, in a couple of months?
Lisa Mowry, Acting Chief Financial Officer for Sanitation. It's not entirely due to bills not being sent out. There's a combination of things that are going on. Part of it is due to that, instances where there have been issues identified as the QA/QC occurs, there's a problem identified with the bill and it gets kicked out. However, one of the other big issues is that the collections approach has been softer during this time period because clearly Water and Power doesn't want to be shutting people's water and power off when there's the potential it could be based on a bad bill. So they haven't been using their traditional automated collections procedures. However, in meeting with them last week, they have indicated that they're going to start moving in that direction again. It's still not going to be quite as automated as it was in the past. So rather than somebody just getting the notice with all the red font on there that they're going to get a utility shut off, they're going to be reaching out to the customers, making phone calls, letting them know that this is coming up, and letting them know that they can request a payment plan. In our discussions with them, the concept is, for instance, if somebody doesn't get billed for 6 months, they get that bill, it's a very large bill, they can arrange a payment plan to take up to 6 months to pay it back, which only seems fair, as long as they're staying current with all of their current billing. So DWP is also going to be putting additional information on their website tracking this issue, so customers can see metrics on, for instance, billings that haven't been paid, which would be those ones where the billings are going out, they're okay, people are just not paying, as well as metrics on number of bills that aren't being billed or revenue that's potentially being delayed because bills aren't being issued. So they are working through that to be more proactive and share this information with the customers, which will also impact our customers on the sanitation side.
Well, I appreciate that, but I'm very worried about the impact, and I don't know if there's something more that we can do. I'll go back to the chair.
Well, I think I'm guessing that a large part of this is due to the fact that when DWP is not collecting on bills, and many of these have been disputed bills because of the well-documented foul-ups that happened in the transfer of the DWP's billing records and to the new system. when people rightly objected to the fact that they got estimated utilities bills, they very often refused to pay the escalated bill. But the sanitation fees and the sewage fees are usually not part of the bill that would be in question. And I think people have just associated them all together and have refused to pay any of it. So that clearly it would be understandable that there would be a drop in collections then for those rates. I'm assuming, tell me if I'm wrong in assuming this, that those amounts likely will be collected, and the amount will come up to its historic very high collection rate, but it's more of a cash flow issue. It's a question of when it will happen, when the DWP's billing system starts to, when the bugs are worked out, when the customer service representatives are up and running, and so forth. But this is not money that has somehow been lost. It's been deferred in its collection.
Absolutely. That's precisely how we're considering these, is that they're delayed revenues that we will be receiving rather than lost revenues.
Okay.
But probably not in this fiscal year.
What we're hearing is we will be seeing some of these, particularly the focus at Water and Power will be on the largest customers to try and make sure that all of those issues are taken care of. That won't help quite so much on the solid resources side because we've got the residential customer base. Those may take a little longer before they're all resolved. But what we're hearing is that we are going to see this, and what we've seen just over the month of February is that there is already progress being made on this.
Okay. Mr. Kretz.
Do we not anticipate at least a small amount of loss based on the fact that over these months some people are going to move? They're not going to be as easily reachable. They move to Texas. What do we do to get them to pay their old bills? Do we have any leverage? What do we anticipate that loss will be, or have we just assumed that doesn't happen incorrectly?
We haven't done specific calculations for what that loss may be. However, you're absolutely right that there will be a small number of people who leave the service area, particularly as you mentioned, somebody who moves out of state, and there's not a whole lot we can do about those. We do feel that it's going to be a very small amount, and essentially that would be the same as what we would see under normal circumstances when there are always people moving in and out of the service area. There's probably always a very small amount where people skip out on their last bill knowing they're leaving the state, but we would expect that to be a very small amount and not material.
Of course, it would be people skipping out on a 6-month or 8-month bill rather than a couple-month bill, so that should be a significant difference. When we say insignificant, are we talking about $25,000 or $500,000? I mean, do we have any idea where that relatively modest amount actually lies?
It's tough to predict because a lot depends on just what's going on with economic conditions in general. Certainly, I would say we're talking more the hundreds of thousands rather than this being millions or an issue of that size.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything further for sanitation, members? All right. Thank you very much. That brings us next to housing. By the way, I should mention that we were joined a moment ago. I'm not sure if he's still here. I think he's stepped out. But we were joined a moment ago by Mayor Rob Ford of the City of Toronto, who was paying us a visit here in Budget and Finance. But I think he has already left. So, Mayor Ford, in absentia, thank you for stopping by. It's good to see you here.
Council members, Madeline Rackley. I'm with the CAO. I am anticipating representatives from the Housing Department to be here momentarily, but if you have questions, I can certainly do my best.
Mr. Blumenfield, housing.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was two different things here. The HUD said we're out of compliance with the community development block grant regulations, right? And I'm just very worried about that situation, wanted to figure out how we got into that situation, where we are vis-a-vis HUD, and the implications for the various service providers in my district and all of our other districts by that decision, because potentially a lot of very good nonprofits are seeing their funding cut, and those services that they're providing, whether domestic violence shelters and others, are out of luck at the moment, as I understand it. So I wanted to get a better understanding of what happened and where we are with that.
Thank you, Council Member. As I said, representatives from Housing should be here momentarily. I'm from the CAO, but I can let you know that there is an audit going on starting this week from HUD of the Housing Department. And the history of that, Housing can better explain. And perhaps Trina from my office has some history on the compliance issues and can answer that.
Trina Unziker, Office of the CAO. I work specifically with the CON plan. I can tell you that some of the discussion about this issue is going to be part of the CLA's report back in the program year 40 budget that's going to be under review. The mayor offered a version of the program year 40 that does have an alternative plan. There are some items, $9.5 million worth of line items, that are not able to be funded as part of the program year 40 budget. The reason for that is there's a 15% cap on the public services that can be covered through the CON plan, the CDBG. And the problem now is that the CBDOs are information that we've received from HUD is that those services all need to be provided under the public services cap, for which we're restricted to 15%. If you were to put together the public services amounts with the CBDO funded amounts for Program 39, you'd wind up with approximately $30 million. And there's simply not sufficient space under that 15% cap, which is now approximately $15.6 million. And so there are potentially some alternatives that need to be explored with the things that can't be funded under the program year 40 budget.
And maybe this is not fair questions for you. We need to wait for the housing folks, and I appreciate that. But the cap didn't change, right? The cap has been 15% for 10 years.
That's correct.
So we were out there spending above that cap.
I don't want to speak out of turn for the department because, of course, now HCID is the administrator. For many years, CDD was the administrator of the CDBG grant. However, it was my understanding that the administrator's best knowledge was that we were in compliance based on discussions that were held with HUD Local. And I think there's probably some discussion continuing. But at the moment, the information that we have from HUD is that these programs cannot be funded under the current form, which is the CBDO. And that is the reason for the recommendation in the Program Year 40 Mayor's proposal.
And what's particularly disturbing about this, too, is that part of HUD, and we get a lot of money from CDBG. That's a huge chunk for a lot of critical services. But part of the way the feds decide HUD CDBG money was since we switched to that block grant, and I remember I was a staffer when that happened, and that was not a great situation. But part of the way that they do that is they judge it based on compliance and other issues. So this mistake is not only going to hurt us in the short term, but it's going to potentially impact a big chunk of money that we get next year and the year after. And that's, on very vulnerable services. So I don't want to just point it out and cause trouble about it. I want to see how we can fix this and work. We need to work with HUD, do whatever mea culpas we need to do, and get this money, because we're talking about a lot of money. Some of us are going to D.C. next week on the League of Cities. I'd like to be armed with the information about this and go meet with some of the people from HUD. I know some of my colleagues would want to do that. We need to get to the bottom of how the problem happened and work to make sure that we have accountability and we fix that problem. But B, that we all chip in and that the council chips in to try to help fix this moving forward, not just for this year's money, but for the next couple of years. Because, and I'm not the expert in housing by any means, but I know enough about it to be really concerned. And so maybe when the housing folks come up, we can get a little bit more details on where that happened. But there are a lot of really important agencies that are, or nonprofits that are dependent on this, that are potentially going to.
Certainly, council members, we can arrange for the Housing Department to speak with you before you go to League of Cities about this item.
So the FSR is due before council on Wednesday. Prior to Wednesday, then, if we can get that information
Absolutely.
Back to council, and particularly to Mr. Blumenfield, that would be
We'll make sure that happens.
Is there any risk that prior expenditures that were out of compliance would need to be reimbursed to HUD?
I'm not aware that there's any risk from
Anybody
prior
made that
years.
assertion in the
I
federal
think the
government?
concern is program year 40 moving forward, which would be effective April 1.
Okay. Okay. Anything further on housing, members?
I mean, risk of prior years, but this year's money is stopped, right? I mean,
Effective April 1st, 2014.
Yeah, so it's not. I mean, they're not going to reach back into prior years, but they are effectively cutting off major programs.
Yeah. Okay. Anything further? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and then finally, the last department I believe I have on my list is the zoo, which I called. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, finally.
Yeah, sorry. This time we didn't even go in alpha order, and you still came last.
That's
we
all right.
try to be fair and jump
At least
around
we got
a little
chance.
bit. I just wanted to ask about. I mean, it's good that we are projecting a surplus, but revenues are down almost $1 million against budget. So, can you speak to that a little bit, and particularly the $300,000 revision that's needed to be made in GLAZA's revenue projections? Can you speak to those issues, please?
Yes, John Lewis, Director of the Los Angeles Zoo, and we are running a little behind on our revenues at this moment, and the overarching factor has to do with the development and the opening of our new Rainforest of the Americas exhibit. It was due to be open at the first of the fiscal year. It's now scheduled to be opened at the end of April. So the projections that we had in our budget for this fiscal year were all based on that being front-loaded. Some of it was a little over ambitious projections in the first part of the year, but as we were looking at this data, the second half of the year is a little under-projected. So combination of spring break coming up, opening of the rainforest, and we're also going to be reopening the Bird Show Theater, which was completely renovated about that same time. So we think we can whittle away quite a bit of the revenue shortfall, and based on some of the salary savings that we have, we're also getting more parking revenue than what we projected. So we think we can get close to balancing the budget, if not balancing, having a deficit that we can cover with our enterprise fund.
Great. So you're now clearly on pace to be open with the Rainforest exhibit next month.
Just literally any day now in the next week or so, they should be turning the project over to us so we can start moving in animals, running the systems, and be prepared for the end of April.
Great. Mr. Kretz.
How aggressively are you planning on marketing the new exhibit?
Very much so. So that's a big part of what the difference was. Although with our new agreement, GLAZA has been marketing the zoo quite heavily up till now, but not focusing on the rainforest. Last week we had, I think it was 23,000 in the weekend. When it snowed at the zoo, if you didn't know that, and several of the animals got to play in the snow. But we had just a lot of people at the zoo that day. So they are marketing very aggressively for all of our events, for things that are going on in our normal course.
Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Members, anything further for the zoo? Mr. Bonin?
The zoo, no.
All right. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, we do
Yes.
have one final amendment.
Yes.
There was a request by the Chief Legislative Analyst to address this amendment. It's a request from one of the involving council budget. The council, subject to the mayor approval, authorize the controller to transfer $350,000 in AB 1290 funds regarding account 28214 CD14 to as follows: general city purposes, council district community services, account 0714 50,000, and the council fund 100 salaries as needed, account 1070 in the amount of $300,000. We could submit the technical instruction to Ms. Pohl.
Okay, and I think that amendment is already before us. Right. So just any further discussion on the FSR before we... Okay, Mr. Bonin.
I messed up and I didn't catch something earlier under planning. Would it be possible, there's a recommendation in here to do an interdepartmental transfer regarding the transit-oriented district work around the Expo line. Would it be possible to hold that recommendation for another week? Or
is there anything that would be time-sensitive about that? Anybody from the CAO's office able to speak to that?
Oh, it's my understanding that this project is already in the works.
I know.
This was funding that reverted. It was through no fault of planning. I am not sure if this could create an impact to the department. I'm wondering if any issues could be addressed between now and the time this goes to council. In the department's absence, I wouldn't want to speak for them.
I can do that, yes. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Thank
So
you.
we'll follow up with your office.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question that I was going to ask as part of next year's upcoming budget process, but it seems like it might be timely now as well, since we're building up our reserves to a pretty significant degree. Have we looked at doing anything more aggressive in terms of investment of those reserves, or are we just getting a standard bank type of return that's virtually nothing and just letting it sit there? So obviously our pension systems, we invest pretty aggressively and benefit by that. What do we do with our money that is in reserve currently?
It's, I believe the treasurer can probably answer that question, but it's my understanding because it is reserves, it needs to be very liquid, meaning available for the controller to tap into at any time. So my guess is that it's being held as in a fund that's as liquid as possible, which means it's getting very little, if any, interest with regards to where that cash is being deposited.
I wonder if that's a conversation that we should have with the controller as we move forward and as we add beyond what we've typically had in the reserves, that we might be able to use some of that to our advantage in growing the actual reserves.
It's worth asking the question. At some future point, Mr. Santana, maybe we can have a report back on possible strategies that might be adopted to increase the return on investment, if you will, for at least some portion, perhaps, of the reserve, or the budget stabilization fund, or both. Okay, with that, members, so just yes.
One last item, just as a shout out, City Clerk should be congratulated. Everybody who helped overturn the City Health Department initiative in terms of our budgeting. That was a good thing for our budget, and so I just wanted to throw a shout out to the City Clerk for doing that.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Thank you. All right, so just so that the record is clear, we are holding recommendations 9, 20, and 21. We have how many amendments before us? We have the amendment regarding CD14 AB 1290 funding. We have the amendment that's before us regarding street services on Broadway. Is that it?
I believe that's it. And there was an additional recommendation to hold the funds for EMD, and that item is within the unappropriated balance, attachment 7.
Yes, thank you very much. So with those amendments then, without objection, members, we'll go ahead and approve the report with all of those amendments. Thank
Mr.
you
Chair,
very much.
I'm not sure if I missed it or not. That included not moving forward with unfunding the fire department
Yes,
ambulance.
that was recommendation number 9, so we're holding that recommendation in committee, as well as 20 and 21, and then the other amendments that were just described.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all very much. Ms. Gutierrez, thank you. All right. That brings us, Mr. Blumenfield.
You said
I was going to go to 6, but we can go to, let's go to item 7 next.
Item number 7 is the City Administrative Officer and City Attorney reports and ordinance relative to successor 2013-16 Memorandum of Understanding and a settlement agreement for the City Attorney and Confidential Attorneys Bargaining Units, MOUs 29 and 31, respectively. This item was also referred to Personnel and Animal Welfare Committee.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Miguel Santana, CAO. What you have before you is a resolution of 2 cases as well as a MOU with MOUs 29 and 31. As you know, the city adopted a policy to freeze the retiree health care benefit for any bargaining units that were not contributing to that benefit. That benefit was frozen. Most bargaining units in the city agreed to make that contribution of 4% of their salary. There were a handful that did not, the city attorneys being one. There was a legal challenge filed on that issue, and what this item does is resolve that matter. In addition to resolving the litigation, it also will now result in all city attorneys contributing towards retiree health care, 4%. It also resolves the matter pertaining to the furloughs. As you know, during the height of the economic challenges that we confronted, furloughs were adopted as a strategy. We were challenged on the use of furloughs. This, what's before you, settles that as well. Like we did with IBW, where we not only settled litigation, but we also sought to adopt a comprehensive solution in relation to a broader MOU. What's before you also does that. It's a 3-year contract. There are 0 COLAs for each one of those years, which is what we recommend in light of the continued challenges that we face. It has at the end of this contract, those members of the bargaining units will make the contribution towards retiree health care, as well as ultimately a 10% contribution towards health care for active employees. It includes a number of other concessions for the city, including restructuring the STEP program, lowering the starting salary for city attorneys to make it more cost-effective to hire, as well as eliminating some of the steps that exist through the process. So overall, this does have a one-time cost associated to it that's ultimately overshadowed by the ongoing savings that the contract will ultimately result in. So this has been as a consequence of ongoing mediation that has been occurring for the last 1.5 years as directed by ERC. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Members, questions? Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, just a reminder, this is the last furlough-related case?
Yeah, we've only had one. That's correct. No, actually, we've had 2. This is one of the cases that we resolved.
So we no longer have that issue floating around once we finalize this?
I don't believe so, but I could confirm that. I'll check with the city attorney to make sure we don't have another furlough case, but I believe this is the only one left.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bonner?
First question is, I guess, a point of order or a question. Why are we not doing this in closed session?
That's a good question. And the reason is that everything that we're discussing here has already been made widely public. And the reason for that, Mr. Santana?
Well, this is the final phase of the settlement. The settlement itself has been voted on by the union. The MOU itself was public, and so normally when a settlement is reached, then it's before the council for adoption.
Mr. Kretz asked if this was sort of the end of the furlough lawsuits. My understanding is that this settlement doesn't cover folks who have retired since the lawsuit was brought, and that they may still be interested in legal action?
Well, the union cannot represent those who are retired.
Mm-hmm.
And so the city doesn't represent those who are retired. So in the context of this case, neither party represents those members who have retired since furloughs were adopted till now. So they had no specific role since they've already retired from the city system.
But do we anticipate legal action from them?
They do.
I see heads behind you nodding. So
Well,
I don't
you know, they'll be there are members here. They'll be speaking on that issue.
Right. And does the proposal, the proposed settlement say anything about promotions or have any provisions that include promotions?
Yes, it does. It includes a number of promotions that are some based on seniority and some based on merit. And we work closely with the city attorney himself as well as his representatives to find the right balance. The department, in light of the fiscal crisis, basically did not experience any promotions during that period of time. In the context of the settlement and the MOU, we were seeking to remedy that as a way of providing a greater level of management within the department. So, yeah, the settlement does include that.
And you said that the city attorney has worked with you on that. The current city attorney is then okay with this agreement?
Yes, he was intimately involved in the negotiations through his representative.
You said that this has a cost, but it's overshadowed by the savings. Can you quantify that?
So in our fiscal impact statement, we indicate there's a one-time cost of this fiscal year of $2.6 million. Some of that's due to the attorney's fees. Some of that is due to an element of the MOU, which has a professional development allowance. And as we indicated in the financial status report that you just adopted, we will be working with the department to figure out how that cost is going to be covered. And my conversation with the city attorney, they've already identified some one-time money within the current budget to help address some of that cost. Over 3 years, the total cost is estimated to be $8.9 million, of which 8.3 of it is one time. And so there are elements of this settlement that are one time. There are other savings that are ongoing that will extend beyond the MOU. The contribution to retiree health care is an ongoing contribution. The contribution towards health care for active employees is an ongoing contribution. And then ultimately by changing the step structure, both by reducing the started salary, elongating the step process. So there will be ongoing savings associated with that overall reform. So the idea here was trying to take two major liabilities and find opportunities to minimize their impact to the city, which we were able to do. These were liabilities that were expected to be well over $22 to $30 million, and bring them down to a more manageable level while resolving two major cases. Particularly concerned with the issue of retiree health care, which was the foundation of much of the overall resolution of the city's finances.
The folks who are retired that aren't covered by this, do we know how many there are and what percentage of the group that the lawsuit was brought by that represents?
You're asking how. Could you please ask the question again? Make
One
sure I
of my
answer
first
correctly.
questions was about the folks who've retired, and so they're not covered by this lawsuit, and whether or not we think they may continue to bring a lawsuit or bring a separate suit. I was just wondering how large a pool of people that is, and how large a segment of the original lawsuit that is.
Not sure at this point, and if it got to the point where a lawsuit is filed, we'll be discussing that with you in closed session.
Okay.
Okay, anything further on this, members? We have a couple of cards. I'd like to ask first Peter King, followed by Phil Sugar.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Peter King, and I indeed am one of the recent retirees from the city attorney's office.
That's why you were shaking your head.
Yes, and we have actually retained an attorney, a baker's dozen, 13 of us, and that seems to be the global number of folks that are retired city attorneys that were subject to the furloughs, were being represented, and I guess now have been abandoned, even though they were representing us during the litigation on the furloughs issue. So we're here because our attorney has actually been in conversations with the Atkins firm, the city's firm, and we're trying to resolve this as part and parcel of this global settlement and MOU that you're doing with the current city employees, city attorneys. And so we're only talking about 13, and of those 13, many of them were senior attorneys. And over the 3 years of furloughs, that represented close to $100,000 per employee for that was lost income from the furloughs. What Mr. Santana didn't make clear is that we actually won that case in the furloughs case. The federal court basically said that the city should have gone to arbitration on that, and we would be filing and are ready to file another lawsuit, although we'd like to avoid that because we're essentially willing, I think, we'd have to confer with our attorneys, but we're essentially willing, if we're given a couple-week opportunity and discussions with your lawyers, to resolve that lawsuit and sign the releases for pennies on the dollar. It would be about $1.3 million plus attorney fees if we have to go to court. And we're successful, and we'd have the same judge, and chances are we'd be successful again. And we'd like that opportunity. We'd like you to give us a couple weeks. Our attorney has been in conversations with your attorneys and hope to be included in this global settlement, wrap it up, and the city will be out of all the lawsuits. Otherwise, we will be forced to. And we really do think it's unfair that we were represented and now we've been cut out. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sugar.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a question of the gentleman who was just speaking?
Peter.
Is there any reason why this has to be part of the settlement, or could we do the same thing just negotiating with your group separately?
Well, we were hoping to do it by and through our with all the parties, because we do have reason to believe that we may have a lawsuit against our former attorneys and our former comrades, and we really don't want to go there. And we're just hoping that in consultation with your attorneys and our attorney, Mike Posner of Posner and Rosen, that we could wrap this up without having to, on pretty much, hopefully, the same terms and conditions as you're wrapping it up with the current 425 city attorneys.
So you think it's easier and cleaner to do it as part of the...
I think so, and it'd be a done deal if, in fact, my sense is that most of the 13 would just like essentially the same deal as the current city employees are getting, which is about $18,600 over the course of $18,600 over the course of 3 years, which amounts to with 13, if you do even 20,000, it's 260,000 versus 1.3 million plus attorney fees later if we have to file suit. So we're trying to resolve this. We're trying to be fair-minded, but that's where we are. We're a small pool of people.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Rhodes. Oh, I'm sorry. No. I called you, got interrupted. I'm sorry, Mr. Sugar. Mr. Sugar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members, and I appreciate the comments that I have heard about the entire process. After spending 39 and a half years representing the city of Los Angeles in multi-million-dollar litigation and standing before many courts in state and federal court, one always wanted to feel that one was resolving an issue and a problem. I think has been pointed out that the proposal does not resolve the issue. The issue is not going to go away. And as an attorney representing the city for all those years, I would not be comfortable going forward leaving these things dangling. Now, you're going to resolve a potential lawsuit with 425 attorneys. Now, you've left out 13 of us. Those 13 are not going to be shy or bashful about bringing their own lawsuit. The 13 were never consulted. They were never asked. They were never given notice. They never had any opportunity to participate in court, in any class designation, in any of the negotiations. So I just quickly looked at Mr. Santana's figures here, and it says that you're paying $325,000 in attorney's fees to the association. If you divide that by 13, that's $25,000 for each one of us, and the entire case goes away. It's resolved. There's nothing dangling. There's no innuendo about age discrimination or any other type of discrimination. That does not include the cost, the attorney's fees that the city of Los Angeles has incurred. I don't know what that figure is, but I have to assume it is at least the $325,000 that the association is being reimbursed. So while I do not speak for the entire group, I can fairly say that the entire group is willing to sit down, be fair-minded, and come up with a resolution, but nobody's ever approached us. Nobody's ever sat down and said, how can we either include you in this resolution, include you in the lawsuit, or have a separate resolution? I agree with Mr. King that if it was all wrapped up together and simply adding in the retirees and negotiating a payment to each of us, it would be a fine resolution. I calculate that in the 3 years of furloughs, I lost well over $100,000. I think that's probably true for the other 13. So you are potentially buying a $1.3 to $1.5 million lawsuit for, as Peter says, pennies on the dollar. You can buy this easily for $500,000 or less. This committee is about budget and finance. I think that the public is well served by resolving the entire case, all potential plaintiffs, wrap up the entire thing, and put the thing to rest. Otherwise, we are all facing a protracted bit of litigation. Being retired, it's a little easier for me to devote a lot of my time to some outside litigation. I really don't want to sue my client of 39 and a half years. I really don't. I really want this thing just to go to bed and be resolved.
Thank you very much. And thank you for all those years of service as well. Dr. Rhodes.
I just wondered if we might be able to get an accounting of the dollar value of the 10% health care contribution.
Mr. Santana, can you speak to that?
We'll be happy to provide that to you and Mrs. Rhodes. It depends on what plan you receive. That becomes effective on January 1st.
Thank you.
But we'll be happy to submit that.
Okay.
Great. If I could respond specifically to the questions of those who are retired.
Sure.
So first of all, in the settlement, there's no direct relationship between the professional development allowance and the furloughs that were taken. Furloughs were applied citywide, not just to the city attorney's office. And if you read through the document, there's no direct link. The professional development allowance is exactly that. It's intended to provide funding for those city attorneys that currently work for the city so they can engage in educational opportunities, attend conferences, enhance their effectiveness as attorneys on behalf of the city. there is, while I'm sympathetic to the issues raised by those who have retired, they have no specific, they're not really a party to this lawsuit. They are not represented by the unions because they have retired. They're not employed by the city. And so there is no specific manner in which to include them in the actual overall settlement. Keep in mind that the settlement has a number of pieces to it, of which current and future employees of the city attorney's office will be contributing to make the whole thing work. If you're retired, you no longer participate in that. In light of the discussion that's been held and the specific, the potential threat of litigation that we just heard, I do recommend if there's any further discussion about this that it be done in closed session with our outside counsel.
I was just going to request whether we might be able to do that. I certainly would have some further questions and debate.
We can certainly schedule a future agenda item to discuss those separate issues. Given the magnitude of this matter and the resolution of it, I'm disinclined to hold up moving forward to council with this matter, given the fact that I learned about these issues 3 hours ago. And this is a significant resolution of an important part of our labor relations right now. But I think we should certainly have a further discussion about these issues that were raised. Mr. Kretz.
I think we actually should have a further discussion about them today. Are we able to go into closed session today on this item?
It hasn't been agendized that way, so we can't.
Are we able to do that before this comes to council?
We could have a special meeting of council to a special agenda of council that would include closed session discussion of this item. You could do that, right? I shouldn't speak on this subject without checking with the experts first.
It's already scheduled for Wednesday council, but I believe a special agenda could be issued for Wednesday with closed session language if appropriate.
Yeah, I think this absolutely should be a closed session discussion because I think it merits further discussion.
I think that seems fine. Okay. So I don't know if that has to be a report from Budget and Finance or who would do that, but
it would need to be a request made of the Council President's Office for a special council agenda on Wednesday.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll just make that request then.
Great.
All right. Anything further on this, members? Okay. Well, with that, then, if there's no objection, we'll go ahead. It would be the action of the committee to approve the recommendations of the CAO's report unless there's objection to doing so, and then to request a closed session discussion on this matter and the related matters that were raised in public comment at council on Wednesday. All right, that'll be the action of the committee. So that brings us then to Mr. Blumenfield. Are you ready on item number 6?
Yes.
Okay. Item number 6. Please.
Item number 6 is the motion Blumenfield Kokorian relative to instructing the city administrative officer to create a comprehensive capital infrastructure strategic plan, report back periodically on the status of the capital infrastructure strategic plan and associated funding, including the city's current funding policy and viable alternatives, and develop an easily publicly accessible and free to the public mapping tool to track infrastructure investment citywide.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring the CAO up on it, but not that I know you don't want to spend a long time on this one, but it's we're coming off of years without having capital improvement projects. The tides are turning, but we have crumbling infrastructure. Infrastructure is so important, and if we are going to build our infrastructure over these next several years, the only way we're going to do it is if we actually know what's in the pipeline. Everybody talks about the amount of infrastructure needs that we have, but unless we can quantify that and have a really good prioritization of that, we're not going to be able to meet those needs in the future, especially when we start shopping at the federal level and the state level. If we have a clear strategic plan about our infrastructure needs, that's not only going to help us meet our own needs internally, but more importantly, it's going to help us when we're going externally for additional funds. So with that, I just want to check with the CAO in terms of how we're doing with that, how we're choosing projects for it, and just to get a little bit of a report on that.
Very good.
Jackie Wagner, CAO, Municipal Facilities Group. And so we are prepared to work on this motion. We have the CAO Asset Management Strategic Planning Unit, which is engaged in beginning the inventory of capital projects, and looking for directions on how soon you want this back.
Well, and you do a 5-year plan of some sort, right? And
we have done a 5-year plan, and we do the 5-year outlook. But in terms of a comprehensive plan, we do not currently have we do not currently have a 5-year plan, but we want to establish that.
Okay. So again, the other aspect then, since you're putting it together, that I want to make sure as part of this is the mapping aspect of it. Control Panel LA has mapping features, and I think that incorporating a mapping function so constituents can see where large-scale projects are currently now and where they're planned to be in the future would go a long way to helping us, and geographically where they are, especially for our own needs, but also for when our congressional members are trying to seek funding for different projects, we'll know where those projects are and where they are in the system.
Absolutely, we agree with that, and we do plan on including the mapping feature.
Great. Well, then, we wanted to move quickly through this item just to know that it's a priority for us, and the other aspect of this is to see if there's ways to bring in, some of our educational institutions, UCLA, USC, CSUN, and others who can help with this. This is not a bad project to have those types of partners with in terms of making this more effective.
I agree with you, sir, and we will follow all of you. We'll take everything you said into consideration and do a comprehensive job of it.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir.
So with regard to the mapping function then, is it the expectation that there will be some analysis of the feasibility of that'll be, and cost of that would be reported back, or is that something that you can simply prepare and absorb? Because I think it would be sensible to work with ITA as well as the CAO's office.
As well as planning, as well as BOE. We plan to establish a working group and to gather all of the related city departments that would be involved.
Okay.
Our Bureau of Public Works bureaus, as well as our General Services Department, and capture the full realm of municipal facilities as well as physical plants.
Great. So, Mr. Blumenfield, then with regard to the final moving paragraph of the motion, would it make sense to have recommendations reported back to your committee and to the Budget and Finance Committee with regard to feasibility and cost and various mapping options that the working group might develop for further discussion so that we can have an imprint on that
Sure.
as well as determine its cost?
That's fine. I mean, I'm happy with it just going to Budget Committee since it's mostly a budget item, but I'm also happy to hear it in ITGS in terms of the mapping thing. I don't think will be a big technology issue since you pretty much have
I don't think so.
Have it there. I don't know that needs to be. Happy to hear it, but I don't think we need to.
Okay, very good. Then let's go ahead and, as part of your report back, when you do come back and report back, if you could include the range of options for mapping and what the cost of that would be.
Is there a time frame that you had in mind? I think this is going to be a pretty extensive endeavor, and we'd also like to be able to report back to you periodically on the progress of the plan.
No, it needn't be any more urgent than the other moving clauses here. When you are prepared to report back on a comprehensive capital infrastructure strategic plan, you can report back on the options on mapping as well, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
Yeah, my priority is always yesterday. But I know we need to do this thoughtfully and move forward, so I appreciate that.
Okay, absolutely.
So without objection, members, it'll be the action of the committee to approve the motion. And that brings us then, I think, finally to item number 8.
Item number 8 is an environmental impact report and chief legislative analyst's report relative to the approval of the village at Westfield Topanga subvention agreement. And according to the city clerk, this item is required to have a public hearing as well.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what Mr. Smith said.
It's there's a required public hearing associated with this item, according to the city clerk.
Okay, that's part of it.
Let's start with some comments. Let's start with some comments before we...
It's, you know what, Mr. Bloomfield, it's your pleasure. If you'd like to hear members of the public before we hear the report, that'd be fine.
Oh, no, I just wanted to make comments before we heard the report. General comments.
Okay. Then I'll turn it to Mr. Bloomfield first to open up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I want to personally welcome the Westfield folks here and the members of the community here and our staff here to talk about the Village at Westfield Topanga Subvention Agreement. I'm very excited that the Village at Westfield Topanga project is going to happen soon. It's coming to my district. The Village at Westfield Topanga is, for those of you who don't know it, it is a first-class mixed-use development and will be a major new destination for shopping, dining, and investment in the San Fernando Valley. From my perspective, this is going to be a transformative project for the Valley. It is a very positive project for the Valley, and I'm very much in support of it. As many of you know, it's going to include upscale retail, boutique specialty shops, personal services, restaurants, a Costco with a member-only fueling station, and a community center. The project will invest more than $335 million in our local economy and create jobs that we very much need, both good construction jobs and permanent jobs for local residents. The project will raise property values, attract other investments, and improve the attractiveness of the West Valley as a desirable place to live and do business. It's also going to be an anchor of the Warner Center 2035 specific plan, which sets a course for modern planning, green building standards, sustainability, and job creation in our area. Many of my colleagues here were here when this project came through the entitlement process and when the initial public policy decision to provide an economic development assistance was made. It was made prior to my being in office. Generally, as a sort of self-proclaimed fiscal skeptic, I'm skeptic when it comes to subventions, and I brought that with me. But my staff and I have worked to ensure that the financial assistance provided by the city through the site-specific revenues makes sense. We worked through the numbers thoroughly. We worked them over and over. We worked with the CLA's office, and these are numbers that having gone through it many times, I feel good about. I believe over the last 7 months, the CLA, the city attorney, and other city staff have done an excellent job kicking the tires to ensure that this is a good deal for the city and the taxpayers are well served. Not that it wasn't a good deal before, but what we've done to it now makes it a substantially better deal. You'll find several safeguards that we've put in place and measures in place in this agreement that are designed to protect the city's financial interests. The subvention agreement for us today offers the opportunity to jumpstart a major economic engine in the West San Fernando Valley and provide a substantial benefit to the entire city. The project is expected to generate tens of millions in net new tax revenue for the city, revenue we simply would not realize without such a project. Via the subvention, Westfield will recoup a portion of that new revenue to help them close a financing gap in the project. Now, by partnering with Westfield to build this project in one phase and sharing the benefits of the economic activity over the years, this project will be a win-win for the city and the residents. If this project were extended over a much longer period of time, it would be great down the road, but it wouldn't get us the benefits that we're seeing today. One phase is critically important because it also allays the fear of some of the residents, some of my constituents, who were very concerned that the Costco and the gas station would go in right away and the restaurants and the other amenities would wait years or until the 9th of never to happen. This assures that no, we're going to get the critical pieces of it up front in phase one. Also, it's important because it means we'll see the jobs and the tax revenues right away, and we'll see the economic bump that comes with that. We must always be vigilant with public dollars and should look carefully and skeptically at any proposal that diverts revenue from the general fund. I've done that with this proposal, as has the CLA and others. The benefits in this case far exceed the costs. We'll get into the details, and I encourage my colleagues to ask questions, kick the tires on the deal as well. And I appreciate that we have Jerry Miller and the city staff here at the table to tell us about the agreement, the protections that we've negotiated with the city, how it's different from what was originally back prior to my being in office 8 months ago, and to give us your feeling about the deal and the fiscal soundness of the deal. So thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Miller for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blumenfield, and thank you very much for your strong leadership on this project. Mr. Miller, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'll start off with some general comments and then hand it over to Oscar on my staff to go through some of the details of the agreement. The agreement before you, again, is a very strong agreement that's compliant with all of the city's, all of the council policies. The city has been doing deals like this really since the late 1990s. And although some of the bigger projects that you've seen have gotten a lot of attention, there are smaller projects as well. I believe that the first one we did was actually the River Center in Mr. Cedillo's district that was connected with a Home Depot that was built there. And there was a subvention agreement to reinvest some of the taxes there. Other smaller ones include Pacoima Plaza, District Square, Carlton Square. So there were a variety of smaller projects that haven't gotten the attention of some of the larger ones, which really have been around the Convention Center, the Ritz-Carlton Marriott, the Wilshire Grand, which all of you are familiar with. Hollywood Highland was done in Hollywood, again, in the late 1990s. Those are the larger projects that have gotten more attention. But again, this is compliant with all of the city policies, namely that we hire an outside consultant to demonstrate that there is a feasibility gap. And we go into a discussion in the report about the process of showing that with absent additional revenue flowing to the project, there is not sufficient revenue that would lead to financing the project up front. Essentially, they couldn't finance the construction of the project without additional cash flow. And that is the point of the subvention agreement. There has to be a demonstrated feasibility gap. Second, only a maximum of 50% of the net new revenue coming to the city could be reinvested, no more than that. In fact, what's before you would reinvest less than 50%. And again, we're talking about direct net new revenue here. We are not talking about the indirects. You do have data relative to job creation, and certainly there is an economic impact of those as well. But what we don't count here is the additional purchasing power, the additional sales tax, the other economic activity that comes from the creation of jobs. This is directly the property tax, the sales tax, the utility tax coming from the development that we don't have today. So again, you have the but-for argument, and again, we always hire outside consultants that do a detailed analysis of that. So it's the but-for argument. But for additional cash flow, it is not feasible to proceed with the project. And again, you've got a very strong community benefits package, as the councilman referred to, and I'll let Oscar go through some of the high points of the contract.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Budget and Finance Committee. My name is Oscar Ishko with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. The project before you, as Councilmember Blumenfield indicated, has gone through a thorough financial analysis. The city hired Rosenell Spevacek Group to conduct that analysis and determine its project feasibility, its fiscal and economic impacts on the city of Los Angeles. That financial feasibility concluded that the project is currently estimated to cost about $335.6 million to construct, of which $300 million is in supportable investment. That means there's about a 35.6 feasibility gap, and the feasibility gap is basically the basis for the city's participation in this project. So as Jerry Miller had indicated, but for the city's participation, this project may be deemed infeasible if the city were not to participate now or in the near future. RSG's report also concluded that if the project is built as proposed, it would generate in the next 25 years approximately $95.4 million, which translates into approximately $41.9 million in net present value. In accordance with city policy, 50% of that would be approximately $20.9 million, which is the amount of the subvention agreement as currently proposed. There are provisions in the agreement that would allow the developer to continue participating, receiving a share of net new tax revenues up to $25 million, which has been done in consideration of the feasibility gap exceeding the current city's participation level. Section 3.3 of the development agreement discusses the construction cost reconciliation process. And what that basically is going to do is the project is currently estimated at $335.6 million. At the end of construction, we will do an audit of the project to determine what the actual construction costs were to make sure that they fall in line with the projected amounts. If the project were to fall under budget, meaning if there would be some savings, then the subvention amount would be reduced dollar for dollar of that amount. If the construction costs were to exceed, the city's participation remains the same. It does not increase. Once that final subvention amount has been established, then from that point on, there will be ongoing subvention payments on the project, which involved an annual reconciliation, or what we call a true-up process, in which the city will review its tax revenues received from the project and do an audit to look over taxable sales reports, financial information that is obtained from the project and its tenants to determine what the actual revenues were from the project, and therefore there will be an annual subvention payment as indicated or outlined in Exhibit K, which is going to be added or has been added to your packet. It was distributed earlier today, which shows the post-subvention schedule over the 25-year period. So what K does is basically serves as a guideline for future payments.
Members, do you have Exhibit K yet? Is this before you, members?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure it was, and should be made available to the public in the back as well if it hasn't been already.
Thank you. Along with the annual true-up process, one item that I'd like to mention is that the net new tax revenues excludes existing city revenues. And what that entails is the revenues at the current Costco on Roscoe Boulevard in Canoga Park, the existing city revenues will not be taken into account in those net new revenues. We're basically going to look at what that existing Costco is currently generating, and that any amount above that will be considered net new, but that amount does not get taken into consideration in the calculation. And as the years go on, the payments will continue up until the point that we have reached either the $20.9 million within the 25-year period, or $25 million if that falls within the 25-year period. In the event that the project does not meet expectations and falls under the $20.9 million figure, that would be solely the amount that the project would receive, basically. So.
And I would like to just add one more thing. Again, on page 5 of our report, we discuss the difference between present value and gross value. There has been a lot of questions, one of which is, what is the total amount of gross dollars that could be received? The difficulty is that the total amount of gross dollars that might be received is, quite honestly, impossible to calculate. What present value does is recognize the time value of money. The quicker you receive it, the higher the present value is today. The slower you receive it, the lower present value is today. The way this agreement will work is that if they're doing better than expected and they're receiving the money quicker than expected, then the agreement will end early. If they don't do as well as expected throughout the agreement, it will go through the end of the term, but they won't reach the $25 million net present value and they won't reach the gross value. So let me give you two extremes, and I know this is difficult to understand, but I have had questions from the media and some other folks. This is a mathematical calculation and has no basis in reality. If in year one on this project, they generated $50 million in net new taxes, and they got 25, then the present value is 25 and the gross value is 25. Well, we all know that that's physically impossible. That cannot happen. On the other hand, if they spend 24 years generating $0 and generate $200 million in year 25, that's also $25 million in today's dollars. But that's $100 million in gross value. Now, I don't want anybody to suggest that I'm saying the developer could get $100 million in gross value over 25 years. That's also impossible. For one, if they weren't generating tax revenue, the project would fail. And two, there is no scenario in which they could generate that in the out years. So the question of the maximum amount they could ever receive in gross value is one that simply can't be answered. What you have before you is the reasonable expectation of the revenue flows throughout the term. And as Oscar mentioned, a total gross value of $95 million. Half of that would be 40 plus net present value of 40 plus, and then it's split 50-50. So, as simple as I can, that's the answer to why somebody can't tell me the max is going to be $40 million, the max is going to be $45 million. The important number is the present value. How much in today's dollars are they going to be able to generate, and the caps are there. So, hopefully that helps.
Okay. Mr. Blumenfield, anything further at this point?
Yeah, well, a number of questions. One of the things we really added to this to make it a solid agreement is the true-ups, the annual true-ups. And I wanted you to talk to my colleagues about that in terms of what happens if the annual true-ups find that the project's not generating as much revenue or the revenue is higher than projected, just to talk about that extra protection that's been put in.
Sure. Again, the actual revenue will be measured annually, and if they're generating, as I indicated, if they're generating more than expected, the remaining present value is calculated annually. So again, they're getting money faster. So every year we'll calculate how much did you receive, how much did we expect that they receive, and we recalculate the balance that would be left in the agreement. So over time, if they're performing better than expected, then the agreement, instead of ending in year 25, could end in year 20 or could end in year 18. On the other hand, if they're generating less than expected, they can never the agreement ends in year 25. So in year 25, if they've generated less than expected, then they don't get the present value of 25 and they don't get the gross value as well. So those protections are in there.
And those are measures that we added to this measure to get those annual true-ups so that we would make sure that the city is really tracking the actual revenues. Another thing I wanted to ask about, because there's been a lot of daily news mentioned it about the hotel not being part of the project anymore. Wanted to talk to you about the impact that has on the subvention, and also to make it clear to folks. I mean, I'm asking questions I know the answers to because we've talked about them, but I think it's important to bring some of this out. When the hotel is built, what happens to the TOT revenue? Go ahead, and I won't answer the question for you. I'll let you answer.
Well, certainly. That was one of the changes. That's why some of the numbers are different. The total project costs are somewhat lower. The gap is somewhat lower. Again, we're not proposing that the full gap be covered. The revenues don't support that. If they build a hotel in the future, then those revenues are not counted. Those would be revenues coming solely to the city. So this is based strictly on what's there now, or what is in the development plan now.
And I guess I think it's important to note that even under the original subvention, the gap in the hotel was relatively small.
Yes.
And so that's not really a major impact on this agreement. It changes some of the numbers, but it's also important that you point out that the TOT tax is not part of this because the hotel is postponed. So if and when the hotel gets put in phase 2, which we hope it'll be done very soon, the city would get all of those revenues.
Yes.
Another question, as a number of community members have raised, they're saying why the rush in terms of the timing, and people have asked me to continue this, but I've been told that we can't continue this at all because we're in a situation where we could miss a critical window and the project could be delayed a year if we don't move this forward expeditiously. Could you speak to that? Or maybe that's a question we have.
Yeah, the year the 1 year delay, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with that. I will say in terms of rushing it through, I mean, this has been to council any number of times, the initial MOU, the subsequent MOU, the initial pass at it in June and now. So it has certainly been discussed many times. This is not something that's just come up recently. But I'm sorry, I can't answer the year's delay.
Okay, maybe when we have comments from the developer, we can have that question addressed. The other thing I wanted to tease out, and I'll let the other members ask questions, but I think we should be proud of some of the green standards, the lead features that are going to be used in construction that are part of this agreement, that I'm very proud of, that are part of this. If you could speak to a little bit of that, how the Costco is being built green.
Yeah, the Costco is being LEED Silver, I believe. Anyway, LEED standard. It requires the entire development to be built to green standards. So that's been an important part of the project.
I'll yield to my other members for questions.
All right, Mr. Bonnet.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, you said we started doing subvention agreements in the late 1990s?
Yes.
Ballpark, how many have we done?
I would say total, including the ones that had to do with the smaller Section 108 ones, I would say 8 or 9.
8 or 9?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. So I'm trying to get a handle on how this works a little bit. So I'm going to ask questions that might sound simplistic. The new revenues that come in, we split them essentially, right? 50-50?
Yes, we split them again up to the cap, yes.
Sales tax, property tax?
Correct.
A large part of the sales tax and the property tax that's generated by the project goes to the county, right?
Yes, but none of that is counted. It's only that revenue coming to the city.
Right. So the county doesn't share its portion, right?
That's right.
So you lop off the county, and then what's left is shared between the city and the developer.
Essentially, the city's it's about 0.75% of the sales tax is what comes to the city. So it is that is shared. Yes.
So the county benefits as much as the city from the economic development, from the jobs in the region, from the sales tax. Why is the county ever part of these subvention agreements?
They have not been, no.
Any reason why?
Well, some of the smaller ones really have been associated with Section 108 money, leveraging Section 108, which is federal money,
right.
that comes only to the city. The county doesn't get any of the TOT on the hotel tax. And again, some of the large ones we've been talking about really involved building hotels and getting room block agreements around the convention center, and all of the TOT really comes to the city. And again, the sales tax, I'd have to get the exact number, but a lot of the sales tax also is siphoned off for road work, street work, transportation, and other stuff. So it also doesn't necessarily go into the county's general fund.
Yeah, I mean, as I was thinking about this, it just seems logical to me that the county should have to share as well. I think they get as much benefit as we do from a lot of the stuff. I mean, even if it's not from the TOT, if a convention comes to town, folks are spending a lot of money at restaurants and other places, and the county will get a lot of benefit from that. Our policy is that the cap of what can be shared is 50%, right?
Yes.
Has that been the policy since the first subvention agreement?
Yes.
Was Staples the first one?
Staples actually, it was the first one to proceed in the policy, but the only subvention in Staples was about $2.3 million out of a $400 million project, and it involved some startup costs and a jobs credit agreement that was similar to Playa Vista. So it was actually the block grant investment fund policy that was around 97, 98 that established the 50% requirement on net new revenue.
Did Playa Vista have a subvention agreement?
No.
Okay. The cap is 50%. You said we've done this 8 or 9 times. How often has the subvention percentage been less than 50%?
Off the top of my head, I can think of 2 or 3 cases in which it's been less than 50.
Because when we do the financial analysis, I mean, I can imagine sometimes the feasibility gap would be 10% or 25% or 30%.
Well, again, it can't exceed what the feasibility gap is, but if the 50% can't reach the feasibility gap, that essentially is an issue the developer needs to deal with, as is the case here.
Right. I'm just surprised our feasibility studies they come back at 50% so often.
Well, again, the Ritz-Carlton Marriott was less than 50. I believe Wilshire Grand was less than 50. I couldn't speak to Hollywood Highland. And again, so the smaller projects had leveraging with federal funds and are a little more complicated.
Okay. This is another simplistic question. This is sort of from the, not to scare anybody, this is sort of from the perspective of the 99%. When you have companies, and I love Westfield, they have been a tremendous employer, they have done a great job in my district, they're wonderful with their employees at LAX, but when you have a big company like that has tremendous resources, how does a firm evaluate the feasibility of whether or not they can do this or not? Because at a certain point, isn't it, I mean, the companies have so much more money, they're not going to go bankrupt if they don't get the return on this, probably. So how do they do a feasibility study? It'd be one thing if you're doing a feasibility study about whether or not, I personally or a mom and pop developer personally can invest, but when you have a company that has so many holdings, how do they do a feasibility study on that makes sense?
Well, actually, Councilman, I think whether you're a billionaire developer or making personal decisions, I think largely the analysis is the same. I mean, they become successful developers because they're not developing on individual projects that from the get-go show that they're going to make a loss. They're just not going to proceed with the development if it doesn't pencil out to them. In this particular case, actually the financing costs are lower here than what I've seen in a number of projects, because my understanding is that they are intending to do some internal financing. So there are a lot of elements that come into play when an entity is evaluating whether or not to proceed. But at the end of the day, if a large project just doesn't show it's going to make money, they're just not going to proceed.
Yeah, I'm a little skeptical on that. As I'm sure this is not our last subvention agreement, I'm probably going to get more skeptical and have more questions with future ones. On this one, I really get the importance of trying to incent and grow economic development in other parts of the city. It's a dynamic very different from my district. I mean, you don't need a subvention agreement in West LA or Venice to get somebody to open a mall or open a Costco. And I totally get it as a different dynamic in other parts of the city. I have different dynamics in my district. I have an incredibly hard time getting affordable housing or permanent supportive housing built in my district because the cost of land is so damn high. It's much easier for an affordable housing developer to go in one of the districts that's clamoring for economic development. Can I then use a similar approach or formula? Instead of scrambling for the barely available HUD dollars to try to put together a housing project, can't I then come up with a proposal under the same formula we do to say, I want a mixed-use project, one floor of commercial development, and we'll do a subvention agreement, and I can do 3 stories of permanent supportive housing above it?
Absolutely.
Okay. What would be the procedure? That would be harder to do even at 50%. But providing permanent supportive housing and getting a veteran or a family off the street provides a huge public good. What's the mechanism for me for that project negotiating higher than 50%?
Well, ultimately, that would be it's a policy decision up to the council. That is council policy, and for obviously, public policy reasons, the council may decide to exceed that.
Right. Okay. If Dion were here, he'd be getting nervous that I'm going so far off the campus. But it made me think. The final question on this particular one is one of the things as a city we want to do, in addition to just creating more jobs, is nurturing and making the city more friendly for small business. What are the provisions for small businesses versus sort of large chains being the tenants. Are there any?
There are not specific provisions for that, and there really haven't been. I think it depends on, again, where the development is and the nature of the development. That is something that I will tell you that's being discussed at length now, because as you know, we're going forward. We created the Economic Development Department, and we're going to be going forward with how to deal with citywide economic development policies and how to focus on small business expansion and retention as part of that discussion. So the projects to date have not had an element of small individual local businesses rather than small businesses that are part of a larger chain. But that's clearly something that going forward the city is going to have to grapple with on how to deal with.
Okay. My takeaway from this is I can use subvention to get homeless vets into permanent supportive housing, so I'll stop talking now.
And Mr. Bonnet, I really appreciate you raising those questions, and it was precisely for that reason that I asked that all subvention agreements be brought to the Budget and Finance Committee from now on, which they never had previously. And I think it's incumbent upon us to evaluate the cost to the general fund as well as the economic development benefits of these. So I appreciate you raising those points. Mr. Englander, did you have
a couple of things. Just first and foremost, I've been around this project since the inception. In fact, far before that. And Mike, you spoke to the differences between council districts, and there are different climates, not just geography, and it is really very, very different. Having been born and raised in the valley, and in particularly right across the street from where this project is being built, I know it well, very well. And it used to be that whole complex, which a lot of people probably even in this room don't remember what it was, a big slip and slide and a miniature golf course that I celebrated several birthdays at. And it's been closed for many, many, many years. And it's just been a big eyesore, quite frankly. We used to have there the movie theater, which was on the corner, and I think there was a Velvet Turtle, if you remember that, back in the day as well. And when this project came about, there was a lot of interest in the project in terms of community participation. And over the years that this project was vetted and debated publicly, there was a lot of concern from the stakeholders in the valley of the impacts and what kinds of traffic and what kinds of benefits it was going to bring. And they could fill warehouses, they could fill auditoriums with people easily at a moment's notice, which you can see they're not here today. And it's not that they at all got tired of coming. It's that Westville did a great job, quite frankly, in working with them and addressing all the impacts and making sure that every voice was heard. There was a lot of work to make this a very good project under Dennis Zine and working with the community, and it made it a very good project. What Bob did was come in when he came in and inherited this project is he took a good project and made it a great project because it started off as a good project. He crossed the T's and dotted the I's and quite frankly, a lot of those pieces were missing. And coming up with all the benefits to outweigh the impacts and looking at new structures, the fact that the hotel deal was changed and he made sure he got involved in that to protect the community. It has to be said because we wouldn't be here today blessing a better project, quite frankly, if that wasn't done. And there were so many stakeholders and people that were involved in this, working with the Warner Center groups, the neighborhood councils, Brad, who's been on this project from day one, who's in the room, Stuart Waldman. I'm not sure exactly what he brought to the table, but he's here anyway. But with that, there was a lot of interest in my district on this project as well. First and foremost, because they not only do they dine there and shop there. We don't have a lot of restaurants. You talk about the differences in districts. Yep. We don't have one single restaurant in my district that actually has valet parking. We don't have a single valet parking operation in CD12. We don't have a parking meter. We don't have much of a parking problem. So you talk about two different worlds. Where my wife and I, we went to dinner a couple weeks ago with Mike and his partner, and it took us an hour driving around to find parking. You know, it's a whole different
My wife said she enjoyed your conversation while I was driving around the...
They do have valet in his district.
They did have valet, but I don't know how to use that service, so...
There's a reason that Mr. Englander is in the Budget and Finance
That's right,
Committee.
that's right.
It's not going to pay for a valet.
They're not licensed yet in the city. We're just working on that. Ordinance is just finally done. But looking at a lot of the impacts that come down and through Canoga, through Topanga, through Shoup, all of those impacts, as they were addressed in the various studies, the traffic reports, a lot of the projects that are being completed as well, in terms of the mitigation, all does come into my district, though. I get most of the impacts with quite frankly, not a lot of what I'll call the benefit. But once again, Westfield did step up, and so I want to thank them for that. And so with that, we'll be asking if we could a friendly amendment and added another ordinance for the Northwest Valley Project Mitigation Fund. And with that, if it can come back, this is, I think, due in council for a placeholder tomorrow. Is that correct?
Yes.
Come back with that for tomorrow. It'll be $100,000 out of the current mitigation plan, which I believe is due and payable within 90 days, and then the balance of $200 at the certificate of occupancy or 18 months, whichever comes first, is what Westfield agreed and offered to do to ensure some of those mitigations are covered as well. I support the project. I think this is, again, taking a good project and making it great. It's been done transparently. We see these projects come throughout the city. As you mentioned, we've done several of these already, but I believe it's the first in the San Fernando Valley.
The first of this size.
Of
the
this
first
size.
in the valley was Pacoima Plaza. But
First
size.
of this size in the valley. And hopefully we'll see a lot more of these public-private partnerships in order to get development moving again, and good, smart projects with smart growth, and with great jobs, good-paying jobs. I think it'll be nice to see this area that we've had blighted and vacant for so many years invested in. So really appreciate all the great work you've done. And with that friendly amendment.
Okay, and I accept the friendly amendment, but making clear that the first $100,000 is coming out of the mitigation fund that exists, and the second is coming from other sources.
Correct. It's from Westfield separately. Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, could I just say one more thing?
Yes.
It's just, as I was looking at this over the weekend, I was struck by the term subvention. I'm like, why the hell do we use the term subvention? That's what you did this weekend? I actually, that was part of my weekend. Honestly, I think we use the term subvention because the dictionary says subvention means subsidy. We don't like using the word subsidy. The way you have described this is revenue sharing. We're getting 50% of revenue we wouldn't have otherwise. And I think if we describe this more accurately and more candidly as revenue sharing, it would make it easier to explain to people.
Good point. And toward that end, I mean, part of this is because we don't have redevelopment agency anymore.
Yep.
This may change as we get, redevelopment financing districts, if the state should move those forward as we all expect to happen. But right now, we don't have a lot of tools in the toolbox in terms of trying to really generate development. And this is one of those where it is important that people understand what it means to subvent dollars. It's not taking dollars out of funds that exist. There's dirt there now. There won't be any dollars at all. But by doing this and creating this partnership, we're creating money that wouldn't otherwise exist and jobs that wouldn't otherwise exist.
Sharing revenue.
Yeah. And I want to thank you, Mr. Englander, for the eloquent way that you described the history of this project, and particularly Mr. Blumenfield's leadership in this, because I can say that the last time this project came before me was in the Plum Committee when I sat on Plum some while back, and I can tell you that there was clearly not unanimity of opinion at that time, and I think through Westfield's work in working with the community and Mr. Blumenfield's leadership, it's remarkable how much public support has been developed now for this project. I've got a couple of quick questions. I, too, like Mr. Bonin, I think need to have a better idea of how these things work in the abstract, and then I want to finally get to public comment. And thank you all for your patience. We've had a very, very meaty agenda today, so I apologize. the whole point of subvention is bridging a gap in feasibility. So when the feasibility analysis is done, is it specific to a type of project, or do they take into account other projects that might be feasible for a particular property that might produce similar revenues, but with a different kind of project? Is that analysis even done?
It is not. No, the analysis is based on the specific project that's being proposed by the developer, the mix of uses, whether it's for sale, the price points on the homes, whether it's rental rates, commercial rates, et cetera. It is specific to the development. And I will say that we get to this point normally when someone has been working with a council office on the kind of development that works for the council office. So there's certainly there would certainly be a role for earlier in the project about sort of an independent evaluation of what are the options financially that might work. But when we're talking about the kinds of agreements that we're dealing with now, no, it's really for the very specific project that's being built.
Okay, and in this case, in fact, there has been, through at least two council offices, there has been a great deal of that kind of dialogue about what the nature of the project would be, and components of it that were originally planned that no longer are, and so forth. Is a 6% discount rate an appropriate one for a net present value calculation for this?
Yes.
And what's that based on?
It varies. It sort of depends on the overall financing costs, and I've seen discount rates substantially higher than that because it really goes to what it's going to cost to finance a project. I mean, that is in the example in the report on a home mortgage is really the same issue. I mean, your payments are going to be what the prevailing rates are on a mortgage. So it can vary. It varies depending upon the market. It varies depending upon the mix of financing, equity, straight lending, and how all of that is put together. So 6% is actually, as I indicated, lower than what I've seen in many cases.
And when the analysis is done of anticipated new revenues, is it at a level of detail that's specific to, for example, the tenant mix in a particular project?
Yes.
Okay. So they're actually looking at who's likely to be in particular spaces of particular size and what they would be anticipated to make in terms of gross revenues, sales tax that generates, and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. All right. Thank you. With that, let's hear from the members of the public, and we'll start with Larry Green. Mr. Green, welcome. And he'll be followed by Brad Rosenheim. Mr. Green, welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for your patience.
Thank you. And I may need, my remarks are about 2 minutes and 15 seconds, if I could.
There's already been a precedent set earlier in this meeting, so I think that'll be fine.
Larry Green, Senior Vice President of Westfield. First, I'd like to thank Councilmember Blumenfeld for his leadership on this and his staff. And I'd also like to acknowledge Jerry Miller and the CLA team. They were incredibly thorough and detailed, and we thank them for their efforts. I'm excited today to be standing with a coalition of labor, business, and community leaders supporting our $350 million investment that will energize Warner Center in the West Valley, and importantly, help close the sales tax gap between Los Angeles and the communities around us. We are shovel ready, as you can see in the photo. Permits are ready to be issued for work that will upgrade our roadways and our infrastructure. Your yes vote means that over 1,400 development, design, and construction jobs will be put to work over the next 18 months instead of the 15 years contemplated by our development agreement. Westfield's private investment of $350 million translates into direct benefits for our first responders and our educators including $95 million in net new revenues to the city, but importantly, well over $162 million in annual economic output. As the councilman mentioned, this project will be one of the first retail projects in the country to receive an equivalency of LEED Silver and to conform with California's Green Building Code. We've been working, as you know, for many years, 10 years on the village. We have over 10,000 community members that have submitted letters in support of this project. We had the support of 2 neighborhood councils, the Canoga Park and Winnetka neighborhood councils. We have the support of VICA, the Valley Economic Alliance, the Woodland Hills and Canoga Park Chambers, the building trades, and Unite Here have been supporters, just to name a few. And importantly, we've had many hearings, and we've always had this council's support. Time and time again, the council has supported us. Now we have an opportunity to expedite the final and most important phase of the village, opening for business. And we're going to do so with 100% of our community benefits. We're going to create over 100 new businesses will open, and 1,500 permanent jobs will be created. This will all be done by 2015. This project will position the Warner Center as one of the top regional and business destinations in the country. We expect over $1.2 billion in sales to come out of the Warner Center as a result of this. And when market conditions allow, we look forward to delivering a first-class union-operated hotel and 285,000 square feet of office. The village is a unique opportunity for the San Fernando Valley, and we hope you will support this request to expedite it. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speakers are Brad Rosenheim and Chuck Martinez. Go in whatever order you'd like.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My name is Brad Rosenheim. I'm representing the Warner Center Association, which represents many of the largest landowners and businesses in the Warner Center community. The village at Westfield, Topanga, is a $350 million investment in the West San Fernando Valley. This regional destination will be home to over 120 businesses and one of the largest economic engines in the San Fernando Valley. The project will create thousands of jobs and serve as a magnet for other economic activity and development in the Warner Center community. The recent passage of the Warner Center 2035 plan envisions an exciting future for Warner Center. Westfield investment at the village will be the catalyst for that exciting future. The Warner Center Association appreciates Councilman Blumenfield's recognition that the assistance being advanced to this project is only a fraction of the net new tax revenues that will be created by the project, and that indeed the subvention agreement, or whatever it should be called, will generate exponential fiscal returns to the community and the entire city of Los Angeles. We appreciate the Council's efforts and willingness to assure that the San Fernando Valley gets its share of investment, community benefits, and world-class destinations, and we very much encourage your support for this important agreement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Chuck Martinez, followed by Ron Miller. Okay? Mr. Miller, welcome. And Mr. Miller will be followed by Diana Williams.
Good afternoon. Ron Miller with the LA Orange County Building and Construction Trades Council. And I just want to start off by thanking the council members here for realizing that now's the time to get up, roll up your sleeves. Let's get the city to put some skin in the game and get this thing built. Like Larry said, it's shovel ready. And like Council Member Englander said, it was a blighted parking lot, basically. City don't make any money off blighted parking lots. They don't even make money off the parking lots that they have here. Right? So that's a story for another day. But you guys need to look into that also. But the building trades stand in support of this. It's going to put a lot of men and women to work, which put their money back into the community because they love LA. So let's get this thing going. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Diana Williams, followed by Gordon Murley. Ms. Williams, welcome.
Good afternoon. I am Diana Williams. I'm the CEO of the Woodland Hills Tarzana Chamber of Commerce, and we have nearly 700 members in our chamber, so we are quite representative of the community. I wanted to let you know that I'm here on behalf of the Woodland Hills Tarzana Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors as well. We have 17 community leaders on our board, and Westfield has always been extremely supportive of the community and the chambers, and we wanted to come out and show our support. The Village at Westfield Topanga is something we've all been looking forward to for a very long time, and I'm here to ask you to make your decision and expedite the building of this wonderful project that we've all been anticipating. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Gordon Murley, followed by Stuart Waldman.
My name is Gordon Murley. I'm president of Woodland Hills Homeowners Organization. And we have some concerns because we haven't had time to look at this. We got it late thanks to Councilman Blumenfield on Friday night. And we'd like an extension to be able to make sure that it ends up being what is being said today. We worked hard with Westfield to make sure, and fortunately we have Councilman Blumenfield who has listened well to us, but we want this to be a project that sets the gold standard for the rest of the city that everybody has to meet, and not be one that becomes a problem because we forgot something in it. And we see no reason with the short time, as all of you have said, you want a good project. We want to be sure the wording's there so it ends up being enforceably a good project. So we would ask that you give an extension to give the community time, because you will note Westfield did not mention the Warner Center Woodland Hills Neighborhood Council as being supportive of it, and all of us have worked to try and make it supportive because we live in the community. Most of the other people that are speaking before you don't live in the community, so we have a greater investment, and we'd like you to consider the people who live there to be able to look at it and give you our endorsement.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Our next speaker is Stuart Waldman, followed by Rachel Torres, and I'd like to ask Ms. Torres to come up and join Mr. Waldman at the front table.
Good afternoon, council members. Stuart Waldman. I am president of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, VICA. We have close to 400 members and who created over 100,000 jobs in the city of Los Angeles. The Village at Westfield Topanga will immediately create thousands of jobs for local residents. It's a world-class project that will also generate much-needed tax revenue to the city of Los Angeles. The tax dollars generated in our neighborhood will stay in our neighborhood for improvements to our communities. Excuse me. Cough. Westfield is willing to invest $350 million in this project, which will generate over $140 million of net new revenue to the city over 25 years. Above and beyond this, the village will bring hundreds of new businesses to our community and create a new community destination for the West Valley. VICA urges you and the city to work with Westfield to bring this project into our community as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker is Ms. Torres. Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Torres. I'm a senior research analyst with Unite Here, Local 11, the Hospitality and Food Service Workers Union of Southern California. And on behalf of our 20,000 members, we wish to express our strong support for the Village at Westfield Topanga and the process moving forward today. The Westfield Group is a leader and community partner in developing projects that complement communities and workers. They walk the talk in their implementation of local hiring and living wages at the LAX airport, and will continue that here in this project. We're proud to see good jobs both at the construction and permanent workforce of the project, and the strong precedent it sets for the San Fernando Valley. I want to thank this council. We've been at many of these hearings over the past few years, and we look forward to this project going forward today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Members, any further discussion? Mr. Blumenfield, what's your pleasure?
Well, I ask for your aye vote. We've heard it all in terms of the economic engine that this project can put forward. I've been working on this for a very long time, feel good about it, and would urge your aye vote.
Very good. And it looks like without objection, that will be the action of the committee. Thank you all very much for coming down. Thank you very much for your patience in seeing this through. And Mr. Blumenfield, thank you for your leadership. And
Mr. Chair, I've been advised by the city attorney that you need to formally close the public hearing on this matter.
Sorry?
I was advised by the city attorney that you need to formally close the hearing on this matter.
Consider it closed, and we've already taken our, well, I guess we should take an action again now that we've closed the public hearing. Is there any objection to moving forward with the recommendations as suggested by Mr. Blumenfield? Seeing none, that'll be the action of the committee. Thank you all very much. And
amendment in there.
oh yeah, as it was as Mr. Blumenfield accepted Mr. England's friendly amendment.
Okay.
All right, that brings us to our closed session items. Yeah. I have so far received no closed session public comment cards, so public comment on items 1, 2, and 3 is now closed, and we will retire to closed session. Thank you guys very, very much.